Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted, and here we have a deck creation episode with Horobi, Death's Wail. This deck creation comes to us from Sharok, who says, I have two separate decks with the same commander, and was looking to see if both could be combined as one deck as a whole new list with the card pool from both lists. Any additions that you think can be added to the new list, I'd love to see as well. I look forward to see what you create from everything. And the only budget was, of the cards we're adding in from outside the two lists, to be a total of $10 and under. Thank you so much, Sharok, for sending this, and honestly, a very interesting kind of question. I had two lists, and I combined them to create this list, and I think I added probably about 10 cards that I could fit in from outside to kind of round out the lists. So what we have here is a kind of the two lists before. One was a bit of a control Horobi, and the other one's a lot more creature focused. And I try to take the best from both, giving us a bit of a more, let's say, malleable deck that can lean to either direction, that has a lot of utility with its commander, but also quite a lot to do outside of its commander. As is the deck creation episode, I'm mostly going to go through the cards, tell you what's in the deck and why I think they're good. And I will take a moment to just focus on, at the end, the 10 cards I added just for posterity, and also one additional card that really crossed my mind but I didn't think was possible to work with here. So let's get right into it. If you'd like to take a look at the deck list we're talking about today, or if you'd like to submit your own deck list to me so that I can make a video assisting your deck, please check the video description down below. So who is Horobi, Death's Wail, and why are they our mono-black death commander? I think that's what I'm going to call it. You could also call this like an illusion deck. Back in the day, almost all illusions, or at least the ones I remember, would break or be sacrificed if they were targeted. And Horobi makes everyone else have that ability, well, technically itself as well, and so everything kind of breaks that way. However, I am going to just call it a death deck. Horobi is a 4/4 flying spirit with the one ability that says, whenever a creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, destroy that creature. So when I started playing Magic, it was Worldwake, and Kamigawa had passed and had a bit of a reputation of being a weak set. So a lot of the cards in it were very, very cheap. But Commander was slowly starting to get more and more exciting, and a lot of people were pulled towards Kamigawa, which had a lot of legendary creatures. Horobi was always one that caught my eye. I thought the ability was so cool. I loved mono black. I am a black mage at heart, and this creature is just so interesting. So it's so fun to see it again. The main idea or question you have when you build a commander like this is, how do I use this against my opponents without it being used against me? This isn't something I think you often see in modern card design. I think, this being like a double-edged sword, oftentimes now, either there is no effect that your opponents can take advantage of, or the situation becomes that the negative effect of a card like this is unrelated. I think of like the new Geth, who allows you to reanimate creatures, but, makes all your creatures weaker. I guess we did see there was that, I can never remember the legendary. There's a legendary creature that has -1/-1 across the board to all other creatures, which affects you as well. So we do see it sometimes, but I just think this very specific kind of ability we don't see. So a lot of this deck is going to try to take advantage of this ability. Now, there's a few cards from the previous two, and I'm not going to pull up the previous two lists. I think it would be too long to go through all of them, but there's a few cards that I very decidedly did not pick up, and I would warn against them. There's a lot of really cool cards like, honestly, I can't remember their names though, but a lot of them are like, give creature swamp walk, draw a card, or something like that, and target a creature and draw a card. And I would be very careful to not put them in a deck like this. Like, don't get me wrong, I get that they have some utility, but when Horobi's out, it'll destroy the creature, and the spell will fizzle, stopping you from drawing a card. And for me, that kind of undoes the entire point of a card like that. And if you ask me, like, if you don't have Horobi out, it's just a cantrip. As I say often, I don't particularly like cantrips in Commander. I find them just to be too weak. Unless they're attached to something better, I don't like them. So those were easy cuts for me. And another thing I found the deck ran a lot of was a lot of reanimation from the graveyard, but specifically back into hand. And I believe a lot of that had to do with our commander. The fact that our commander is so easy to kill, and that both versions of the deck, one of which the control one had much fewer creatures, it seemed to be that those were in there so that we can keep getting our commander back, as all of our opponents' like target spells are lethal against Horobi, and they're very, very incentivized to destroy Horobi that way. Unless they have no creatures, then they're probably good to just chill. And I took a lot of those out. I put in some cards that kind of do the job a little differently, but I found our collection of land cards would do that a lot better. And I really, really enjoyed that. I thought we should be using our lands for this and not using our slots in the deck. Though once again, there are a few to do that effect. I just want to talk about those two things as they are notably missing. Now that's more to Sharak, who knows both decks, but let's get in and see what the deck does and what we want to do. So first of all, in our 1 mana slot, we have a bunch of creatures that are just very, very good with Horobi and pretty decent otherwise. Festering Goblin, Festering Mummy, and Festering Newt all do the same thing, and so does actually Shambling Goblin. All of them, when they die, they give a creature -1/-1. Now, if you ask me, all of this is almost good enough, especially depending on the kind of power level you're playing with. There's a lot of creatures these days that are X1s that are just very, very strong. And if you think about these on block, they present 2 damage to a creature, which means they can take out X2s if they attack into you. And I think that's already really good. Obviously, with our commander, that is a lethal, -1/-1, or Festering Mummy, which specifically puts a -1/-1 counter. All of these, it gets considerably better, but I think they're just decent creatures to start with, especially if we're going to incentivize our creatures dying, which we will, and if we're going to incentivize attacking our opponents, which we also will. Getting these attacks in are going to be relevant. Shadow Alley Denizen is similar. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you get to give something Intimidate, which is good on our side to get our attacks through, but also good to destroy creatures with Horobi out. I like a lot of these cards that have that both sides ability, where we can do something with Horobi out and something when Horobi is not out. I have a few cards that just work with Horobi, but they're notable because of how strong they are. Another one like this, once again, is Hex Parasite. Hex Parasite, notably, you can just put 0 for X and pay 2 life, meaning for no cost out of 2 life, it can start targeting things, triggering Horobi, and destroying creatures. That is not including the fact that sometimes this card will destroy planeswalkers, sometimes it'll remove counters off of things that are very, very important. So this is kind of a nice utility creature that I am a big fan of. I've definitely played this in modern shells where you use it to reduce your life total for Death Shadow, but generally just a big fan of this creature. Very, very strong. Looking at our 2-drops, we have a few Blood Artist effects. I guess I'm not going to go completely in order. We have Blood Artist, we have Falkenrath Noble, and we have Sir Conrad the Grim, and to an extent Massacre Worm, which are creatures when our opponent's creatures die, we will gain some benefits. Now, Blood Artist and, of course, where are we? I just had you. Falkenrath Noble, there we go, are 2 creatures that will trigger off any death. So both incentivizes to let our own creatures die, benefit from Horobi, or just generally get us extra points here and there. They do only target 1 player, but we didn't have a budget for Zulaport Cutthroat, which I might suggest in another draft. But it is kind of better this way because it's a lot easier for us to destroy our opponent's creatures than to lose our own. We're not an Aristocrats deck in that way. This is more just kind of benefiting from having more death triggers. Coming here, we have one of, actually 2 additions that I particularly liked. I think the deck can use a little more mana and a little more ramp, but I wanted to go a different direction in it. Mono black ramp at 2 mana, like the artifacts that you might think, the mana rocks, isn't particularly good. There's nothing that's really worth playing, and when you can't play cards that like the talismans or the signets, your options get pretty bad right away. So instinctively, I wanted to look at some treasure creation, and I wanted to find some creatures. So Horde Robber and Zentarum Bandit, who's a creature I'm really surprised I don't play, are both creatures that create treasure tokens on attack and damage. Horde Robber has to hit a player and is a 1/3, but the Bandit only has to attack and pay a life, and you get a treasure token. Like I said before, with the use of certain intimidate tactics or Horobi's ability to kind of like destroy all your opponent's creatures, these creatures can attack pretty well by themselves and hopefully survive. Especially, I think, early on, Horde Robber as a 1/3 can get a few attacks in, especially against opponents who do not have creatures at the start of the game. Now, there's going to be times that they're just going to attack, get one treasure token, and then no longer have profitable attacks. Zentarum Bandit is a bit better at that, because if Zentarum Bandit survives that first attack, you are guaranteed a second treasure on a second attack, and I really, really like that. But there's going to be a point that Horde Robber maybe just sits around. And I think that's fine. I think in mono black especially, that first treasure token is going to be very valuable, both with our 4-mana commander being able to come out on turn 3, but also a lot of our really strong draw and setup spells will be easier to get off early, which will hopefully draw us into lands and hopefully draw us more of a game plan early on, so that acceleration will be very worthwhile. Mogus's Marauder is a card that I really, really like. It is, once again, a double-sided sword for what happens here, right? With Horobi out, this can target a creature for each devotion to black you have, destroying perhaps a whole board of creatures depending on your black mana. But when you don't, it gives a bunch of creatures haste and intimidate on your side of the field. And as you've been noticing, this whole attacking into your opponent's kind of idea, I think is going to be particularly good. Once again, Intimidate works pretty well. Looking back at Horde Robber and Zentarum Bandit makes them a lot better, and that's not even including some of our bigger creatures who benefit even further from haste. Morbid Opportunist, another card that I could not believe it was this price until I realized it just got reprinted in Fallout. At 50 cents, definitely pick up this card. This card is very, very good. This card just works on either side of the field. We don't mind too much where the death triggers are coming from, but we are getting death triggers and drawing cards. Vashta Narada, Vashta Narada, which sounds like a proper name, but it is, I guess, a type of alien from Doctor Who. Now, if you know me, I don't easily recommend out-of-universe cards, but this one feels almost tailor-made for the deck. And I think it is the most expensive card that I'm adding in at $3 or $2, depending where you get it. This is an indestructible creature, which is very, very notable, which means it has a natural protection from your commander. Anyone who's targeting with removal or anything that might usually be able to kill it just can't. It's still vulnerable to Swords to Plowshare effects, but it is also very notably immune to board wipes. This creature has Shadow, and it grows per end step if a creature died this turn. Now, this plays a little differently because of it's one per turn. However, either way you cut it, this deck just really has the means to take advantage of this. You just need to figure out your triggers for Horobi and just kind of pace them out throughout each turn, right? Since each end step in a turn cycle, this can come back to your turn as a 5/5, which I think is really, really good. That's not even including just the regular creatures that are going to die on the battlefield growing this creature. I think this is really, really good, and it feels like tailor-made for Horobi, so I really, really do like that. Looking onwards, we've got another one of my additions. Once again, this is $2, but I think we can get it for, is that euros? Yeah, there we go. I'm pretty sure I saw it somewhere else for a bit cheaper. Oh, it's a different version of the card, sorry. So we can get this for about $1, which allows us to put it in budget, but Gisa Glorious Resurrector is another type of card that takes advantage of our opponent's death triggers. Now, I do like that she's also a 4/4. I didn't note this, but 4/4 commander is a really nice place to be, just in case of combat or anything. It attacks very well, and Gisa herself also attacks very, very well. But the main idea is that every time something dies, it gets exiled on your opponent's battlefield, and then come to your turn, you get decayed versions of those cards. Now, I really, really like this. I think there's a really nice payoff if you can keep Gisa on the battlefield to get all of the creatures you're killing with Horobi. But even if you lose Gisa, I think the fact that it exiles out those creatures is very much so worthwhile. I think Gisa is very, very strong, especially at the power level this deck is playing around in. I think this is a card that gets dropped out and your opponents have to kind of readjust their game plan. And we have a much stronger version of this in higher mana, but we'll get there soon. Now we have a collection of cards that I really do like. They are all in a row too, and they are the initiative cards. This is 3 cards I've added in because, as you've noticed, I've been really liking the attacking function of this deck, and I think initiative is a great way to take advantage of this. Mainly, I think one of the big perks of this is it is really easy to keep initiative and get it back when we have Horobi. And when we have Horobi and we have initiative, we basically take advantage of the fact that we are like locking down the board really, really easily. Now, Monarch works similarly, but I kind of try to decide between them because they both come in as a 4 mana ability on a creature, and we were starting to clump up the 4 mana slot, so I felt I wanted to go for initiative. If you wanted to, you could probably easily play both, but initiative just has so many nice like abilities to it. Let's see if we can get the token out. We cannot make it. Can we? View details. Yeah. So if you're not familiar with the Undercity, there is just a lot of things on it that are very good. From the land search, which is something black has a really hard time with, to scrying, to goading, to draw. That's usually the way I will this kind of Z shape. But that's not including creating a treasure token, getting a 4/1, dealing 5 direct damage, growing a creature. Notably, the Forge ability, Forge and Goad both trigger Horobi. I didn't even think of that because it is an ability. So that's really cool. And so we have 2 built-in ways to trigger Horobi in the Undercity. But overall, this is just, I think, a very, very good card for the deck. Notably as well, Throne of the Dead 3 will reanimate a creature and give it temporary hexproof, which can be summon a creature from your deck, and hexproof notably stops Horobi's ability. So whatever you do summon, you can keep it at least for a turn cycle if Horobi's out, which is kind of nice. So these 3 creatures all pretty much do the same thing. They're all 4 mana. Passageway Seer gets bigger and it has lifelink. Ravenloft Adventure, which I think is the strongest, exiles your opponent's creatures when they die and puts hit counters, and when it attacks, if you've completed a dungeon, the defending player loses 1 life for each card they own and exile with a hit counter on it. I think that's a lot of text, to be honest, that I think is not as relevant as that first line that just gives initiative, but the exiling of your opponent's creatures, like I said with Gisa, I think is very relevant, and if this ever triggers, I think it's fine. The fact that it's a 3/4 to begin with is a really, really big perk to it, and I do think it's a rather strong card. Vicious Battle Rager is the last version. This says whenever you attack and it gets blocked, the creature's controller loses 5 life. What's notable about this is you can let the Battle Rager be blocked and then destroy its blocker should it destroy the Battle Rager. So if they block with a bigger creature, you can use Horobi's ability to destroy the blocker and you'll still make them lose 5 life and keep the Battle Rager. That's kind of neat, but once again, we're playing this card just for that first line to get initiative, so I think they're all just fine. 4 mana to create a card advantage engine that you have a really easy time keeping, I think is very good. Coming to the top of our curve in our creatures, we have Gary, another addition of mine, and just a good card. I think, especially with all the reanimation we have, I think we're really happy slamming Gary a few times in the game, and we should be able to drain quite a bit of life. We have Ogre Slumlord that turns our opponent's creatures into rats as they die. We already said Sir Conrad, which is an incredibly good card as a mana sink or just draining your opponents. Massacre Worm also is a pseudo board wipe that reduces your opponent's creatures and then triggers on their creatures' deaths. Once again, very good. Tetsamok, which we might as well consider more of a 1 mana spell most of the game, works really, really well from Horobi, with Horobi as 1 black mana can target something, but also when Horobi's not around is just great to put a bunch of counters on creatures and then later destroy them all with a 6/6 Death Touch, which I think is very, very strong. Our final creature is Overseer of the Damned, a card that I believe exists in almost every precon these days, but despite that is, I think, a pretty decent creature. At 7 mana to destroy a creature, get a 5/5 flying, and then immediately get the tap 2/2 zombie and more every single time our opponent's creatures die is a really nice collection. So at just under a quarter of the deck, we've got a nice collection of creatures. Going quickly through sorceries and instants, we've got Bubbling Muck that doubles our mana, Feed the Swarm to deal with enchantments, and then we have a good collection of draw cards. I really think Sharad put a lot of card draw in this deck, and I found that to be the easiest thing to port over. There's probably somewhere we can find a ceiling on this kind of ability, but I'm not one to eschew card draw. I really like having the cards I want in hand, and if we can create the mana to support this, which I've put some effort into, I think we'll be pretty happy with these cards. Especially because a way to play this deck is not to curve into Horobi, but instead just slowly build a board that Horobi benefits from, and then wait until the moment you want to clear the board, play Horobi, and use their ability as many times as you can. In a strategy like that, tapping out to cast Read the Bones is a pretty good strategy and gets you rather far ahead while your opponents kind of build their own boards for you to destroy later. Beseech the Queen is very notable to me as a tutor we have access to, as it was in one of the 2 lists, and I think if you know me, I can't say no to a tutor. I really do like them, and they can get a lot of very choice cards through the deck. As outside of our finishers, most of the deck is very low mana. At instance, Dark Ritual, just a fantastic card in black. Touch of Darkness, very, very notably can target any number of creatures, so this is probably one of our strongest Horobi enablers. Unfortunately, it just doesn't do anything else. There might be some dream card that cares about your opponent's creatures being black, and there are actually a few that come to mind, but we're really playing this as a one-sided board wipe when Horobi is out. And for that power level, I'm okay just having it. Also, at 1 black mana, I'm very okay of just having this card. It's $17, which is very notable. Tragic Slip is removal. Grim Return is another reanimation card that only targets your opponent's creatures that died that turn. But I think this deck has very much so the means to, get away with this kind of card, which I find sometimes to be a little slow in other decks or requiring too much mana. Using Horobi and using a free targeter is just very, very strong in order to be able to get a Grim Return and get their creature. Succumb to Temptation is our last instant, and it's just more draw. Finally, let's look at artifacts and enchantments. Shadow Spear. It's in one of the decks, and I can't say no. I noticed that it's most likely here to turn Hexproof off of our opponent's creatures and Indestructible, both of which are very relevant for Horobi. I really do like that. Just remember, when you equip, you target the creature that it equips, and therefore if Horobi is out and this is unequipped, do not equip it to something, because that something will die. That being said, you could use it to equip to Vashta Narada, who is a very good target for Shadow Spear, as it will survive with the indestructibility. Looking back, Soul Ring, we play Commander, we play Soul Ring. Squeeze Toy is one of those very, very good Horobi activators, and I actually do think that prevent 1 damage is relevant, especially if we could get this out turn 1, and then turn 2 we're attacking with the Bandit or, let's see, the Horde Robber. Preventing just that 1 point of damage can be good enough to get that attack through. And so I think it's not completely dependent on Horobi, and I think it has some nice interplay. Just remember, it's only creatures and not players. Bloodthirsty Blade, likewise, for 1 mana at sorcery speed, we can attach it to things and blow them up with Horobi, but I will argue that Bloodthirsty Blade is just a decent card. I really do like it as some proactive removal. I really do like it on certain creatures to defend yourself from them, or just to create some pressure for your opponents to have to deal with. Very, very good card. We've got Charcoal Diamond to create mana, Distorting Lens. Once again, this is a card that only really works with Horobi. This is, I think, one of the only ones that I kept that does nothing but this. Like, it does nothing more and only targets one creature. I still think it's useful to play, but it's close to the chopping block. Liquid Metal Torque is another one that I've added, and it just happens to be very strong at both being a mana rock and being a target in order to destroy with Horobi. Traditionally, this is seen as Liquid Metal Plating is the better one because it targets lands, and this doesn't. However, Horobi's ability doesn't target lands, so the downside of this card just doesn't exist. It's just a better mana rock in the deck, so I'm very happy to put it here. Mindstone sacks to draw a card, Prismatic Lens can turn mana. Tarian's Journal is another one I've added. Tap it to sacrifice another artifact or creature, draw a card, and activate only as a sorcery, and then you can discard your hand to transform it to a land that you can use to reanimate creatures. So this one really caught my eye for a number of reasons. The first thing about it is that I really like its ability to sacrifice artifacts or creatures that we no longer need at a certain point in the game. I also think this is particularly good with certain creatures like Grey Merchant that are better off to be reanimated, or creatures that have those death triggers when we do not have a sack outlet. Now, they are still sorcery speed, but I do think this card advantage engine is very good. And then on the other side, I really like it as ramp. Do not forget this card does ramp you. You will lose all the cards in your hand, but there is a point in the game where you have no cards in your hand and you will just use this. However, I will say that this thing's ability to put finality counters is not the best reanimation, but it is still very good. Notably, if we put Horobi back into play with this, and then Horobi dies, we have to put Horobi back into the command zone, which is not ideal because most likely we're trying to leave Horobi in the graveyard to reduce the casting cost, but it's still something. I also notably think this is really good at just one extra shot at getting back one of your creatures, and the fact that you could activate it each turn is rather nice. Where were we? Tithing Blade, this was just a card I added because I kind of felt that I wanted both sides of this pressure. Not only did I want Tithing Blade just to force your opponents to sacrifice, I think the Consuming Sepulture is not bad here. Just being able to drain a little bit turn by turn when you have the game locked does add up. And its ability to exile a card such as Horobi to put it back in the command zone is something that can happen. I do like this. I think it's strong, but it is somewhat of a budget include, just to kind of up our 2-mana slot. Going a bit further, we have Tower of Coriel. Once again, a card that can that can be used with Horobi to destroy things. I think I misread this when I put it in. I thought it can only be blocked by walls to make a creature unblockable. I now realize it doesn't do that. With that knowledge, would I still play this? Maybe. I think we could replace it with something, but as a 2-mana to trigger Horobi for free, like once per turn cycle, I think it's still kind of fine. Looking at two cards that are just a little stronger, Scale of Chisgoria and Tooth of Chisgoria are two affinity cards that can come in and target a creature instantly. Both of these effects I think are rather good, with Horobi especially, but are fine otherwise. Adding one toughness to something can make a difference. You wouldn't believe the amount of times Toxic Deluge misses because someone was able to give an extra health to a creature. So I think that's very relevant, and its ability to have affinity will reduce it most likely to like 2 mana half the time, which I think is good. And both of them I think are just fine cards. I like the value of it, and when I consider it a 2 or 1 mana card, I don't mind the fact that it is dependent on Horobi. But once again, there's going to be plenty of situations that extra power or toughness can matter. Our last artifact is the Immortal Sun. Fantastic card, extra draw steps, cheaper spells, stronger creatures, no more planeswalkers. We have access to it as it's in one of the lists. I have no problem playing it. I think it's very good, and if we can power it out early, we're going to be very happy. Finally, our enchantments. Phyrexian Reclamation is a fantastic card to consistently reanimate our creatures over and over again. Retribution of the Ancients is a very good targeter for Horobi at 1 mana, but notably, I think with a few additions that I've put, you do have +1/+1 counters to play with to start killing things when Horobi is not out. Retribution of the Ancients is an amazing card, and the only thing that you're ever held back with is the fact that you have to have a mana limit on it. Recently, I was playing Brina, and I had this out with giant creatures, and the real thing that stopped me from just wiping everyone's board turn after turn was that I was like, really low on mana, and I had to spend all my mana every turn to kind of stay in the game. But if you can create the +1/+1 counters, you can kill the creatures. Animate Dead is a fantastic card. Dance of the Dead, likewise. Tribute to Horobi felt criminal to not be in the deck. We are in a Horobi deck. Not only does it create bodies for you to kill to get benefits off of, it also takes them back and has a 3/3 flyer that will sacrifice creatures to draw you cards. A fantastic card that I really like, and obviously we are in the deck for it. I like the other art, which I'll show as I go once again over the additions at the end, but this is a very, very good card. After which we have Phyrexian Arena and Underworld Connections for card draw, Unspeakable Symbol as a way to once again pay life to put +1/+1 counters on creatures, which will destroy them on your opponent's side or work really, really aggressively with Retribution of the Ancients. It's basically 3 life and 3 life to put -1/-1 on a creature, and 1 black to use the ability. So if you have tons of life, such as after Grey Merchant, you can really take advantage of it, but there is a bit of a limit of how much mana you can pay. Coming to a close, we have our final win conditions. Black Market is a fantastic mana generation device, especially late game, especially to get you into your big cards. Palace Siege is a card that reanimates a creature back into your hand every single turn, which I think is very, very good. And sometimes you can just use it to drain to knock opponents out of the game. I really prefer the Khan's ability, and in a deck like this, you'll get a lot of mileage out of it, but, you know, sometimes Dragons is good. Revel in Riches is just a very decent card, especially in a deck like this. It's very, very meaningful and possible to get to an amount of treasures that your opponents have to actually worry about this card. But if not, you can use this just as a form of ramp as you continue to try to, especially like in mid-game, try to claw your way to victory. Finally, our last card, one of my favorites, is Grave Betrayal. I think this is probably the finisher of the deck. If you can get Grave Betrayal out, then Horobi, and then just blow everything up, notably, probably with Horobi at the same time, you will gain the entire board onto your side. I say you might want to kill Horobi because if you do steal all of your opponent's creatures, you kind of don't want them to evaporate, and so you might want to actually let your own Horobi die in order to ensure that they just, you know, they are harder to deal with. This is such a good card. If you've never played with this card and you like black and creature destruction, you need to play this card. This card is so much fun. It is insane the value you get from it. And that's it. The lands are, I think, copied from almost directly because only one of them had non-swamps in them, so the list comes from there. A bunch of really good stuff, a bunch of reanimation to bring stuff back, something that targets legendary creatures. We've got Cabal Coffers and Cabal Stronghold as mana ramp. We have a bunch of different anti-hexproof to just plain reanimation cards and a few non-basic destruction. Very quickly, I am going to repeat the cards that I wanted to add just for posterity. I do personally really like this Horobi art. I just wanted to point that out. That was the whole point. I do really like it. And I do really like this tribute to Horobi art on this backside. I think it's rather cool. I think it was just one of the promos. All right, my other additions were Zentarum Bandit, Tithing Blade, Horde Robber, Liquid Metal Torque, Tarian's Journal, Vashta Narada, Gisa, Passageway Seer, Vicious Battle Rager, Ravenloft Adventurer, my goodness, Grey Merchant of Asphodel, and as a bonus card that didn't make it through, and I wanted to talk about this, Toshiro Umezawa is really interesting as a payoff for Horobi. Not just in flavor, because they're both from Kamigawa, but Toshiro gets to recast, basically you get to Snapcaster Mage, if you're familiar, basically recast a card, an instant from your graveyard with flashback if a creature dies. And with Toshiro and with Horobi, it means you can use your instant spells, for example, very, very notably Touch of Darkness, to kill a bunch of creatures and then be able to cast more of your instant spells that turn just for free. Well, not for free, you pay mana, but like the card advantage of getting to cast them again. The thing is, this version of the deck is very low on instants because I don't really feel like it needs it. So it would be a different version of the deck, and it didn't fit into the $10 budget that I wanted to go into. I love Toshiro, I think they're such a cool character, and so it'd be a really kind of cool thing to add in, but I just wanted to leave it there. And that's it. That's the fusion of the two decks to make one Horobi Death's Wail deck. A Death Trigger, illusion breaking, horrible whale deck. Thank you so much, Shirok, for sending this deck creation. I think this is really, really cool. There's a lot more we could do with it depending on our budgets, because I think we're hitting the ceiling of what we can change, but the deck itself is rather strong. The only things we'd want to do later than this is just expand on power. You know, things like Underworld Connection becoming Necroponents, for example. Cards that just bring a high, monetary value, but a lot of power to the deck. But until then, I think the deck is just really rather good, and the things it can do are kind of surprisingly, like, attacking on so many different angles. I was very pleased to see how many different synergies we could work out with our creatures attacking, especially with the addition of the initiative. So I hope this puts the deck in a, allows you to play the deck in a way that you want. And if nothing else, I hope this gives you even more ideas of what you can do with the deck, because I think Horobi can just do so much. All right, I'm excited to hear what you think. Good luck. Thank you so much for watching. This video is brought to you by viewers like you and people on my Patreon. If you'd like to send me another draft of this deck, or any deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like to make your deck one of my donation decks I work on, there's a link there too. Finally, if you'd like to like, comment, subscribe, I would be very appreciative. It helps the channel quite a bit. Thank you, and good luck in brewing and building.